I guess what I would like the reader to come away with from this book is a sense of how incredible in some ways the Manhattan Project was, but also the moral dilemmas that it introduced to people who wanted so desperately to win World War II, but also, were horrified by what this new weapon could do to civilization. And I think my parents were right in the middle of that. And also, I know in the reviews I've gotten so far of my book, they kind of comment that in a way it's a quiet book because it talks a lot about daily life and it does have some drama, but that's kind of my object. I guess being a psychologist, what interests me are people and their motivations and their feelings and how they interact with each other. So there's a great framework of a story around it, but I really wanted the reader to get a sense of what it might have been like to be there, just like I was trying to do.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast, where we get to meet amazing authors, again, from around the world. And today we're going to talk to Leslie, and I'm excited to have her on the show. She's got some stories based on her family that she's turned into amazing stories that we all get to enjoy and read. And I'm excited to have her on the show as our guest. I just love meeting great new authors that you might not have heard of yet, but once you hear from Leslie, you're going to fall in love with her. She's just a great person. Leslie, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thanks. And thanks so much for having me on your show.
It's exciting to have you here, Leslie. Do you get a chance to go on podcast often as a guest?
Well, I've started doing it lately because I'm, trying to increase the awareness for my novel that's coming out in January. So I've been on several and I've got several more scheduled and I enjoy it. I was a psychologist in my career and I was an academic psychologist. I was on the faculty at MD Anderson, the big cancer center here in Houston. So I gave a lot of talks and I enjoy public speaking. I said once that when people are scared of public speaking, I say, well, think of it this way. When you're giving a talk, someone has to be pretty rude to get up and walk out. So it's a chance for you to have people's attention without feeling like you're narcissistic.
That's a good point of view. I like that. And then we get to have you on the show and talk all about your journey as an author. And I think from my point of view, I think this serves a great purpose because the reader gets to connect with you. They get to hear the story behind what you're writing. They get to hear your voice. There's just so many touch points through a podcast for a listener and a reader. I think this just helps so much to build that bridge between, between the reader and with you. So I love podcasts and I love hearing your story, and I'm glad you have time to be on the show.
Great. Well, I certainly agree. And I certainly didn't write this novel because I thought it would make any money. I wrote it to connect with readers.
Perfect. So we're all in the right place. This is good. I love it. So Leslie, tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours. Where are you joining me from?
Well, I live in Houston, Texas, and I came down here for my career because, as I said, I worked for MD Anderson. So the Texas Medical Center is a huge employer in Houston.
So what do you love about Houston? What's a beautiful thing that we should all know about?
Well, it's a very multicultural city, and it's got really wonderful restaurants of almost any ethnicity that you could name. And it's got a big Asian population, so we've got lots of South Asian and Chinese and Korean culture and a big Vietnamese community. So
nice. Wow. Something you might not expect to see or to experience in Texas, right? To have that kind of nice mix of all those great countries in one place. That's great.
Well, it's also one of the only remaining Democratic areas in Texas, which is good for me.
So you got to protect that for sure. Good. Yeah. That's excellent. Well, there you go. It's got a lot of wins. I love that. Well, let's talk a little bit about your author journey. You talk about speaking and leading and all of your amazing things that you've done throughout your career. What was it for you that made you go, I want to become an author, I want to write a story, and I want to do this different version of myself to start writing stories? What was it for you that made you interested to do this?
Well, for one thing, I took a lot of creative writing courses in college, and I always, was really interested in writing fiction. But when I started my psychology career, I did a tremendous amount of writing, but it was journal articles, book chapters, and I actually did publish 4 nonfiction books, 3 self-help books, and a textbook.
Wow.
And I would write, composite case examples and things like that. But I always really had a yen to return to writing fiction.
Hmm.
And not only did I retire, and, I'm 73 now, so I retired a while ago. And I retired from my academic career and ran a digital health startup for 5 years. And then that closed during the pandemic. So I had a lot more time on my hands than I'd had in many years. And I started taking some workshops in writing fiction. And I had the idea for this novel because my parents spent World War II in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My dad was a very junior electronics person working on the Manhattan Project, and my mom had already a toddler. And she followed him to Oak Ridge, and they spent several years there during the war. And they had a lot of crazy stories about what it was like, because Oak Ridge was a secret city that, starting in 1942 and ending in about 1946, went from 0 to 75,000 people in a very rural area of Tennessee. And it was filled with young people. The average age of people in Oak Ridge was something like 29. My parents were even younger than that.
Like, so, okay. So what is, for those people who might not be familiar with the Manhattan Project, maybe they're living outside of the U.S. and that's not part of their history. Can you give us kind of a sense of what was the idea behind the Manhattan Project and what, maybe a little bit more about that as well?
Good point that I didn't explain that.
Yeah.
The Manhattan Project was basically a huge research and industrial project to build an atomic bomb. And the reason for doing that was that before World War II, the Germans were working on fission, the process of splitting atoms, and physicists all over the world knew that that could lead to designing a bomb, a very powerful bomb. And the US and the British were very worried that the Germans were working on it and might get to it first, and realized it could be a key to winning World War II.
Wow.
So there were 3 sites in the Manhattan Project. Oak Ridge was one of them. And there was the Hanford plant in Washington State, where they produced plutonium for the bomb. And there was the most famous Los Alamos, where the movie Oppenheimer was based, where they designed the actual bomb, and where a lot of the high-up physicists were. And my dad's group, the group he was part of, was actually a chemistry group, and they produced radioactive isotopes from the reactor in Oak Ridge. That was their job.
Okay, so at what point did you come along in the journey with your parents, and where were you kind of growing up in this time frame when your parents were doing this?
Well, they were in Oak Ridge from 1943 to 1945 or 6.
Okay.
And they had my older sister who is 10 years older than I am. I wasn't born until 1952.
Okay.
So I grew up hearing these stories and knowing my dad had worked on the bomb, and it was the Cold War years. So one of the things that really kind of caught my interest was I was scared. We would go to school and they would show us the movie Duck and Cover with Bert the Turtle, saying, well, if the bombs fall, they're just, hide next to a wall and, hide under your desk with your arm over your head. And I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis happened when I was about 10 years old, and I vividly recall being in the basement of our suburban house with my parents watching President Kennedy on TV talking about, trying to blockade Cuba and wondering if we were all going to be alive the next day. And I said to my dad, why aren't we building a bomb shelter? And he said, honey, it wouldn't help. And so that was kind of devastating. And even after the war, my dad was still involved in some defense projects, and he would go to White Sands, New Mexico, which is near Los Alamos, and he brought back once some of the green glass that was the sand when they tested the first atomic bomb near Los Alamos. The heat of the explosion fused the sand into radioactive green glass. And a lot of the people involved in the project had little pieces of that glass as souvenirs, which wasn't too great because it was somewhat radioactive. So I remember him bringing home a piece of it and saying, I'll show this to you, honey, but you can't keep it because it would be dangerous. So he kept it somewhere. When he was in his last days, and he was 87 when he died after a catastrophic fall, and he was in the hospital and we were talking, and I reminded him of that, and he said, oh, I would never have done that. But I'm sure he did, because I remember it quite clearly.
Wow. Okay, so from your recollection and your conversations with your parents, did they understand fully what they were working on at that time? Or were they just kind of doing like one piece of the puzzle, not realizing the impact for the entirety of what was happening at the time?
Well, one thing that was really unique for my parents, given that when they started on the project, my dad was 23 with 1 year of technical school in electronics, and my mom was a 20-year-old college dropout.
Wow.
They were invited by their group leader, who was a chemist, Charles Coriel, to his house in Chicago to recruit my dad because they pretty desperately, I think, needed electronics instrumentation guys. And so somehow in the course of that evening, he told both my parents about the atomic bomb and that his group was going to be producing the first gram of plutonium. And that was really unusual because usually the only people that really knew what they were working on were the high up physicists and senior leaders. And it was also really rare for the wives to understand that much. So one thing that I kept wishing as I was writing the novel is that I never really talked to my parents about what it was like, especially for my mother, because my dad was working with a group who all knew what they were doing. But for my mom, what was it like for her to have to keep that secret and to know what was going on? And one story I remember that they told me was my mom, when they first got to Oak Ridge, came to have lunch with my dad. And she was sitting and waiting for him at the lab where he worked. And there was like a glass doorway. And she saw a man in a kind of a white suit carrying a pole over his shoulder. And he was walking and walking. And then she saw a little tiny pot suspended from the pole. And then he kept walking, and there was more pole, and finally a second guy dressed in a white suit. And she knew that they must be carrying a highly radioactive sample in that pot, staying as far away from it as they could by having it on those poles. So she knew what was going on, but the guard didn't know, and she saw the look on his face. He was scared and amazed and wondering what the heck is going on here. So I'm sure there were lots of things like that for her. Wow. And another reason I wrote the book is my mom and I were very close when I was a child, and she had a hard life as a woman of the 1950s and 60s. She was whip smart, and she wanted to be a concert pianist or a lawyer. And instead, she was a housewife. And by the time my older sister got ready to go to college, she did become a bookkeeper in order to earn some extra money. And she worked her way up with no formal accounting training to be the first female controller of an industrial company in Illinois. So, that's how ambitious and smart she was. And she was kind of bitter because I think she felt like she had missed a lot of opportunities in her life. And as she got older and depressed, I kind of got alienated from her because I didn't know how to help her, and it was so painful. So after she died, and she died when I was pregnant with my son, so 33 years ago, I felt guilty and bad, and I didn't quite know how to grieve for her. And so writing this book, which is really from her point of view, I wanted to understand what it must have been like for her she got pregnant immediately after getting married at age 19 because she
Wow.
went to see a gynecologist who told her she was infertile, which was obviously wrong. So they didn't take precautions. And
Yeah.
there she was with a sickly, premature baby that she didn't know how to take care of,
Wow.
with 1 year of college left that she couldn't complete. And then they all, trucked down to Oak Ridge, which was a really alien environment for her as a young Jewish woman from the south side of Chicago into this southern environment. And so I really wanted to understand and empathize with her story, and that was kind of my way of grieving for her in a way I wasn't able to do.
So the process of writing the book, then, what were some of the starting points for you? Like, how did you arrange the story? Did you have to go find little clips and talk to people within your family? How did you start the process of writing this book?
Well, unfortunately, there was no one left in my family or among my parents' few connections that I knew about who could really tell me the story. So I had all those old repeated stories that I remembered from my parents.
Yeah.
But the rest of the research I did was really the way I would research any historical novel. I went to, I read tons of books about the Manhattan Project, and the Manhattan Project has some wonderful archives. The Atomic Heritage Foundation has an online website where you can either read transcripts or listen to recordings of people who worked in the Manhattan Project. So
Right.
I looked for people who had worked in my dad's same group, the Coriell chemistry group. And one of the most exciting things I found was that Charles Coriell's daughter, Julie Coriell, had published about a 600-page book of interviews with her father, which were done in I think around the 60s or early 70s. I should get that date correct. Julie would slap me. But it was part of the Columbia University Oral History Project. So he was interviewed by another child of the Manhattan Project, Joan Bainbridge, whose father designed the Trinity site. And so I never really knew what my dad did in the Manhattan Project. And there I was with all these sources, and my dad was even mentioned a couple of times in passing. And, all of a sudden I understood the whole arc of, what he was involved in during the war. And the Coriell group, as the Trinity test got closer, which was the first test of the plutonium-based bomb, they had a terrible problem designing a trigger that would implode the plutonium. And they came up with a design that was a kind of a sphere made out of very precisely machined lenses. And the lenses had to be triggered very precisely so they would all implode at once and detonate the plutonium. And to do that, in the real bomb, they used a isotope called polonium. But for the test, they needed something else that would be radioactive that would allow them to design this trigger so it would work. And that's what the Coriell group was doing. And Oppenheimer kept calling them and going, I need more, I need it faster. And Coriell said in his interviews that he started feeling like he was a person that was holding up the entire atomic bomb project. Wow. So it was quite a deal for them to figure out. They knew what they wanted to produce, which was called barium-140, and it was a radioactive isotope of barium with a very short half-life. And what they did was they trucked it to Los Alamos under armed guard in a huge lead-lined casket on a flatbed truck, and just getting it into that container in a metal cone that would hold it. And by the time it got to Los Alamos, it decayed into a much more radioactive isotope called lanthanum. And in Los Alamos, they called it Rala. And it was so dangerous that in Oak Ridge, they built a hot lab with special remote controls to handle these very radioactive things. But they didn't have that in Los Alamos. So they had some kind of a Rube Goldberg contraption with strings and pulleys to try to handle it from a distance. And they dropped the sample, the first little sample they sent them, which was in glass tubing. And it was so radioactive that they had to take the floor of the room and dig it out and bury it in some remote canyon. So
really?
Yeah. So they didn't have some of the niceties of radiation safety. And in fact, my dad had an accidental radiation exposure in Oak Ridge. And thank goodness he lived to be 87 and never got cancer. But a lot of other people in that group were not so lucky, including Julie's father, who died of a rare bone cancer that almost certainly was triggered by his radiation exposures.
Yeah. Did your from what you know, did your parents understand fully how dangerous it was to be in that environment, living in that community, surrounded by all of these things? Did they have any concept of the impact on their health at all?
I don't know how much my mother knew, although I'm sure she must have been pretty scared when my dad had his exposure. My dad certainly knew, and I have a little video of him actually telling about how he got exposed. He was working in what they called the counting lab, and it had to be totally free of radiation. So he wasn't working on anything dangerous, but they all wore radiation badges, several of them clipped to their white coats. And one day, the radiation safety guys came to him and said, your badges are totally exposed. What are you doing? And he said, I'm not doing anything. I'm in the counting lab. And the next day, they came again and said, your radiation badge is exposed again. And he said, you better come up here because I don't know why. So they came with little kind of Geiger counter type instruments, and the closer they got to his desk, the more radiation there was. And they all realized that the problem was his buddies on the other side of the wall next to his desk were working with a very radioactive sample, and they had built lead bricks around it, but they had neglected to put the lead bricks against the wall, the back wall where my dad's desk was. So he'd been being hit by gamma rays for several days, and it was just lucky that it wasn't worth. My parents did tell me my dad was 6'3", and they said that he got down to 140 pounds and he had a terrible sore throat. So in the novel, I suggest that he may have gotten strep throat, because radiation can affect your immune system. And I don't know if this is true, but penicillin had just been really widely used at that point. So in the novel, I say that they used penicillin to cure his strep throat.
So for a reader then, how much of the story is true? How much of the story is fictionalized to create and fill in the gaps? Kind of what kind of percentage would you say of the book you think are true facts that are historically accurate? Can you give the reader an idea of how much?
Wow, it's a little hard to give a percentage, but what I would say is a lot of the day-to-day life stories are based really closely on my parents' lives and on the
Okay.
stories they told about Oak Ridge.
Well,
But if I was going to just do that, I should have written a memoir, and I
right.
didn't have enough knowledge to write a memoir. Plus,
True.
I wanted to write a novel.
Yeah.
So a lot of the plot of the novel is fictionalized. And one thing I haven't mentioned so far is that one of the other things that inspired me was news started coming out around 2019 that there were two Soviet atomic spies in Oak Ridge who managed to send information to the Soviets and escape back to the Soviet Union after World War II without being detected or arrested. And
Oh,
they both worked in the same building, X10, as my dad, the reactor building. And they were both electronics engineers. And they were both from similar families to my dad's first generation Jewish immigrant families, only they were both communists and my dad was a liberal Democrat.
wow.
So I would guess he may have met them. You know, they were both in the special engineers detachment. My dad was a civilian, but they all worked together and one was a radiation safety officer. So what I did is I put together a much more dramatic plot where there's a love triangle and the wife and the young couple gives piano lessons to this SED officer and has a crush on him. And he tries to seduce and then blackmail her into revealing her husband's files to him. And she
Wow.
has to decide whether she's going to turn him in as a possible spy or and risk losing her marriage or whether she's going to let it go. And the other thing that's very fictional is I have two female friends in the novel, and I only know one of my mother's friends from that time. And and I did use her as a minor character, but all I know about my mother's other friends is that she said she had a lot of friends there. She loved to play bridge, and she made friends with Southern women who were very different than her and were kind of steel magnolias, as she put it. And she loved them. And she said one woman she met when they first met asked her, "Are you sure you're a Jew? Because you're blonde." And I thought all Jews had dark hair. "And where are your horns?" And my mother was just aghast. And this woman actually believed that Jews had horns.
Oh, come
So I
on.
used that in the book to create the character of Betty, who is a Richmond debutante whose husband works for DuPont, which was the engineering company that ran a
Yeah.
lot of things in Oak Ridge, and how, despite their different backgrounds, they become friends and help each other through the traumas of living in Oak Ridge.
Hor- Horns. That's interesting. Okay. 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 I didn't expect that. For a reader, what's kind of your opening direction for a reader when they read the book for the first time? If you could have a few minutes just to kind of give them, beyond what we've already talked about, kind of an introductory, kind of a love letter maybe to the reader about this book and why this book is here and what your hope is maybe for the reader. If you could have a moment with the reader, what would you like to tell them about this book in particular that will
You
help them
don't,
to enjoy the story?
you don't ask easy questions.
No, I know. I have the expert with me. I'm going to challenge you. I like it.
I guess what I would like the reader to come away with from this book is a sense of how how incredible in some ways the Manhattan Project was, but also the moral dilemmas that it introduced to people who wanted so desperately to win World War II, but also, you know, were horrified by what this new weapon could do to civilization. And I think my parents were right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And also, I know in the reviews I've gotten so far of my book, they kind of comment that in a way it's a quiet book because it talks a lot about daily life and it does have some drama, but that's kind of my object. I guess being a psychologist, what interests me are people and their motivations and their feelings and how they interact with each other. So there's a great framework of a story around it, but I really wanted the reader to get a sense of what it might have been like to be there, just like I was trying to do.
When you think back about the story of your family and the Manhattan Project and all the things that they were involved in, have you ever thought or contemplated how your family life would have been different had your parents not been a part of this and maybe didn't picked a more traditional route, or what, that dinner party when they were in Chicago, when they were invited to be a part of this, they said no? Or have you ever contemplated what their life would have been like had they not been a part of this?
I haven't thought a lot about that because I think World War II was so overwhelming to Americans that the only other thing my dad wanted to do was to enlist and fight in combat. And he felt guilty that,
Really?
he didn't have a chance to do that. And because they'd married so young and they were so
Yeah.
poor at that point, there weren't that many opportunities open to them. So in a way, I think working on the Manhattan Project was, for my dad, an entree into his career. He never finished his college degree, and he had a pretty successful career at a high level as a self-taught electronics and systems engineer. I don't think you could do that now, although I guess some of the tech bros do something similar, teach themselves computer stuff. But they were both very self-taught people. And my dad did sign a petition that was circulated in Oak Ridge asking Truman not to use the bomb on Japan without a demonstration first for the world of showing how powerful and deadly it was. And that petition started at the Chicago Met Lab, which was one of the origin places of the Manhattan Project, and was also signed by about 67 people in Oak Ridge. And I have a copy of it with Charles Coriel and my dad's signatures on it.
Really?
But General Groves, the general who ran the Manhattan Project, was really worried that if it got out, the Japanese would know the bomb was imminent, and he made it top secret. And I don't think Truman ever even saw it. And I'm not sure it would have, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have made any difference anyway. But later on in his career, my dad in the 1970s worked with engineers from Toshiba on a project, and he spent 3 or 4 6-week periods in Japan. And I know he went to Hiroshima and saw the monuments and the Peace Park and everything, and was very moved. And he kind of fell in love with Japanese culture as well. So
Really?
he was a very open person. And, when I was in high school, some films from Hiroshima and Nagasaki of the horrible wounds the people suffered were declassified. And it was about a 17-minute film that ran on our public broadcast network. And I sat and watched it with my dad when I was around 17. And I asked him, how do you feel having worked on this? And he said, honey, you have to realize that we thought the Nazis were going to get the bomb, and we didn't feel like we had a choice. We had to get it first. And, later on, I had more feelings about it. And I know he was angry about Nagasaki. He felt like they only used that second bomb to see how a plutonium bomb would perform in combat. And he felt it was really unnecessary. And I know he hated the hydrogen bomb stuff, and my parents were not very fond of Edward Teller, who is often called the father of the hydrogen bomb, who was a physicist who was very, very pro atomic warfare. So, it was difficult for them.
Yeah. It must be difficult. Yeah. What about the relationship your parents had with their family? Because you talked about them leaving and moving to another community where it's just they broke all ties and they're young. What about their parents, for your mother's parents and your father's parents? What was it like? Do you have any point of reference about them leaving their own families and starting a new life somewhere different? That's got to be traumatic just alone.
There was a lot of fictionalized stuff about that in the book. I
Okay.
don't know that much at all in
Okay.
reality about their communications. I know they weren't allowed to tell their families anything.
Well, that's
Um,
hard.
but they left my older sister, who was maybe about a year and a half old, with my mother's parents for a few months while my mother went down to Oak Ridge because Oak Ridge was being built very fast, but there was a big housing shortage. So when they got there, they had to live in sex-separated dorms. My mom was in the women's dorm and my dad was in the men's dorm.
Really?
And it took maybe 6 months or 4 months, something like that, until their house was ready. And then my mother went back to Chicago and brought my sister down. So
Wow.
my guess is my mother's parents knew where Oak Ridge was, but had no idea what kind of war project was going on there. And I know very little about communication with my dad's family.
What do you think your parents would think of the book, the story being told? Would they be excited about this? Would they be nervous about this story going out? Do you have any concept of what their response might be to this book being out in the world now?
Well, I gave my mother a fictional extramarital affair. So
Well, there you go. That's one thing. Yeah.
I think my mother had enough of a sense of humor and she was enough of a feminist that I think she would like the book. I think she would like that I tried to understand her and her point of view and what it was like for her. I think my dad, he was always very proud of anything I wrote, but I think he would be a little bit mad at me for fictionalizing the story like that.
That's not true. That didn't happen, right?
Yeah. Your mother never did that.
There you go. Do you find yourself in the book at all? Do we get a little taste of you at all at some point during the story? Or are there elements of you maybe kind of in the characters?
I've written 3 novels now. Well, one's not quite finished, and the other 2 have a lot of me in them, and this one doesn't have all that much.
Okay.
Maybe I used a couple of stories from my own childhood as part of Barbara's childhood. Barbara is the character that's like my older sister. But other than that, I don't really think so, unless I've maybe put more of myself than I think into Doris, who's the character that was based on my mother.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. So the book when is the book available for everybody? Is it out right now?
No, it will come out on January the 27th of
Okay.
next year. It's
Great.
available on pre-order, though, wherever
Excellent.
you can buy books. I think it's available. I've seen it on, certainly up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and bookshop.org.
Okay.
So anyone who would like to pre-order it, please do.
Excellent. Yeah. And
Fission,
I'm
the
on,
novel of Atomic Heartbreak.
yeah, I've been on your website while we're chatting. I love the cover of the book. It's just, I feel like I'm time traveling just looking at the cover. It's gorgeous.
I don't know.
Does that,
I have a big poster in back of me.
yeah, I
with
see you.
cover.
I know it's beautiful.
And this is also, here it is. Yeah,
Nice.
they did a great job with the cover. And you see the baby carriage there. My mom had a rich uncle, and he gave them this elaborate English baby carriage, which was great for Oak Ridge because Oak Ridge was a sea of mud, and they had built wooden boardwalks instead of sidewalks. So the baby carriage had big enough wheels that my mother could wheel my sister around in it. And I had a picture of my sister in the baby carriage, and I gave that to the book cover people, and they used it to kind of model that baby carriage.
Wow. It's excellent. No, I think it's a gorgeous cover. It makes you want to read the book. People say don't judge a book by its cover, but I think this is a great example of a book cover that makes you want to read this book. I love it.
Thank you.
It's exciting. Okay, so the book comes out in the beginning of next year. My show is called Living the Next Chapter. It's all about the next thing. We want to celebrate. We actually want people to come buy the book and do that. But my audience always is curious when we get a great conversation like this with an author, how are you living your next chapter, Leslie? Like, celebrating the book launch, yes, but is there something else that you're working on in the future that we can look forward to?
Oh, absolutely. I have one other novel that's kind of like a psychological thriller that I have been not yet able to find a way that was comfortable for me to publish. But I've been working really hard on a third novel that's about a 70-year-old physician who retires and discovers while she's on vacation in Hawaii that her breast cancer has returned. And it's about kind of trying to live her life and have as much meaning in her life as she can, knowing that her time is probably going to be limited. So that's a dangerous novel to write because I'm not sure how many people are going to want to read it. But it has a lot of great boomer sex scenes in it. You know, I spent my psychological career a lot on sexual dysfunction and fertility issues. So I have all kinds of crazy sex toys and stuff in the book, and I'm hoping that will persuade people to buy it, even though it has some grim parts.
Wow. Well, there you go. That's a different premise completely for this book. Interesting. Okay. Well, again, you're leveraging your experience and knowledge and helping people in the past and then bringing it forward into a story. I think that's great. If you could leave our authors with one encouragement today, Leslie, maybe they're thinking about writing a story about their family and doing a fictionalized version like you've done, and they're not really sure how to approach it or kind of be inspired to do this story the way you've done it. If you could help somebody who's in a similar situation, wanting to write a book like this about their family, do you have any suggestions or encouragement for that author that's listening? Can we leave them with some hope here?
Well, I think people who are starting out writing fiction can take advantage of such a vast sea of resources online that didn't used to be there. Not only are there great craft books, but you can participate in online workshops if you don't have the funds or the time to go to an in-person writers workshop, and you can join organizations like the Women's Fiction Writers Association has been really valuable to me. I'm in a couple of critique groups, and we have a weekly historical fiction group that meets online and has different speakers and discussion topics. And just the community I've found of other writers and how supportive we all are to each other has been amazing to me. So I think, and the other thing is there's so many paths to publishing now. You can self-publish, you can try to get an agent and big five publisher if you're very good and very lucky. You can do hybrid publishing, which is the path that I've chosen for this book. And there's just so many books being published now and so many ways to do it that I think building a community and writing, sitting down and doing it, and not letting yourself be intimidated from getting started is just really important.
Let's talk about the website as we head out the door. Leslie, where do you want to send people to follow the journey of the book, to pre-order the book through your website and contact you? Where do you want to send the listeners so they can stay in touch?
Well, I do have a website, and it's just leslieschoverauthor.com, and there's a page for Fission with an order button that links to all the places you can order it and the reviews and stuff that it's gotten so far. And it also talks about me as an author, so that's probably the best place. I also have a Substack called Nuclear Fiction Newsletter. And so I write about the stories behind the book and about my current writing, and I try to post on it a couple of times a month.
Well, that's an excellent resource. I'm glad to hear you're on Substack. That's a great place for authors to connect with your audience, right? And sign up, give you their email, and follow your journey. And you have direct contact with your readers, which is an excellent resource. So we'll make sure we have links for that in the show notes as well, so people can come and follow you there. Leslie, thank you so much for doing this. A selfish reason why I ask if you're working on new projects in the future is because I want you to come back. I want to have more conversations with you and to celebrate the launch of your next project It's a selfish way of getting more time with you. So that's why I asked that question about living your next chapter. So I'm thrilled to hear you're working on new projects, and thank you for making time to do this. I'm sure your family, even though they might not agree with everything that's in the book, I'm sure they'd be thrilled to know that their story lives on and that you can share this in the unique way you've done. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful cover. I think you're going to get a lot of great results from, and a lot of great comments from readers. And my encouragement for the readers that are listening, when you buy Leslie's book, when you finally get a copy of this in the beginning or middle of January when it comes out, that you leave a great review. Leslie'd love to hear your thoughts about the story. And it also then tells others who might be curious about this book but not sure if it's the right book for them. Your words as a reader help to convince people and encourage them to also buy the book. So please leave a detailed review. I know we talk about this all the time on this show, but I think it does bring more people to support amazing authors like Leslie. So everyone, please do that. Leslie, thank you so much for being on the show. I will keep the door open for you. Come back and let's talk about what's next for you. But thank you for making time for us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, and I'd love to come back.
Excellent. All the information, everybody, as always, in the show notes. Again, leave that great review. Leslie, thank you so much for being part of the show. Hey, thank you so much, again, for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5 kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.